sono Niccolini e Santo Stefano. Martedì sarebbe per... No, dimmi ipoteticamente. No, non posso. Prova, 1, 2, 3, prova microfono, prova microfono, 1, 2, 3, questo è il floor, questo è il floor, questo è il floor. Floor, 1, 2, 3, prova microfono, floor. Sull'line o su mic? Ciao. Prova, 1, 2, 3, prova microfono, 1, 2, 3, prova microfono. Allora facciamo un altro modo, aspetta. 1, 2, 3, prova microfono, 1, 2, 3, prova microfono. Ok, senti bene? Ok, questo è il floor, questo è il floor e senti bene. Vediamo se senti anche l'ita tradotto.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are going to start soon. Thank you for taking your seats. Signore e signori, vi ringraziamo di prendere le sedi.
Please take your seats, please.
Thank you. Introduce everybody.
And then
the Nashat Valovarkasan gets up and does a keynote,
yes,
followed by Stefan
generally,
and then you take over the management.
and they come back.
Yeah, they sit down.
But I don't introduce the ministers because you will have.
I just do this,
Yeah.
women in leadership, all the names, and then I give the floor to
the minister.
the minister.
And then
Get your point.
so then
Oh no, what I do this, and then you speak because you have the mic, and you say, if I can invite the minister.
and Minister Balu,
Nashat Valovarkasan.
Minister Balu,
Madame la ministre.
Madame la ministre,
Madame la ministre.
Madame la ministre, okay?
And when she is done, you invite the Minister of Italian Minister of Education, Stefano Giannini. Huh? No, non prima di sedere, si sedono e poi si alzano e Brigitte li chiama. By Professor Brigitte Lafan, Director of the Robert Schuman Center for Advanced Studies at the EUI, Our distinguished participants include French Minister of National Education, Higher Education and Research, Najat Vallaud-Belkacem, Italian Minister of Education, Universities and Research, Stefania Giannini, Portugal's former Minister of State and Finance, Maria Luís Albuquerque, Vice President of the Italian Constitutional Court, Marta Cartabia, and Editorial Director of Le Monde, Mrs. Sylvie Kaufmann.
Good afternoon, everyone. Madame le Ministre, je vous invite. Bonjour à toutes et
Good afternoon to everybody. Ministers, dear colleagues, and elected representatives, Mayor of Florence, and also wish to say dear friends. First of all, I have to tell you how glad I am to be back in Florence. I was saying to my colleague, my Italian colleagues, that it's a bit like going back to my sources, my origins, because the European idea took shape in the Europe of universities, the Europe of culture, the Europe of knowledge. Europe, before it became the union we have today, was a republic of letters and sciences. And therefore, coming back to Florence, to Italy, back to the cradle of humanism, reminds us how deep the roots of the European Union are in a common view which gave great value to human progress, with the idea of confidence in knowledge and culture so as to lead to a true emancipation. Therefore, we are in halls which are replete with history, and it's a great pleasure to be able to discuss the situation, the future of the European Union. I understand it's also a major responsibility because currently the European program requires our active support, and in dangerous times as are ours, we have to increase our intelligence and our creativity. The distress of our time should not be allowed to distress our minds. Critical understanding, clear-mindedness, training and research are the resources which we need to tap today and which will help us to tackle the crises we have before us and to find lasting solutions to those crises. These resources are at the heart of the European University Institute. With this is something which is a major resource for Europe. I'd like to stress the quality of the work carried out here and the excellence of the research conducted here, which is broadly recognized. This institute is a European success story, and it is a sign of the intellectual dynamism of Europe and the proof that today's Europe lives up to the heritage of the Europe of Renaissance. This place and the paintings around are testimony to this, bring us back to the basis of the European design, and in particular, this is something where we can find inspiration to overcome the crisis we have before us. Higher education institutes have keys to our solutions. France, which has prepared, is a candidate for the next ministerial meeting in Bologna in 2018, is aware of this. We need a culture which lives on humanist values and which can really live up to the needs for inclusion and technological progress. And since we need this kind of university, I'd like to say that in the work we have underway with the Ministry of Education in Italy, there is the project of the European Charter of Students, which will be tested in 2016. But coming back to humanism and the values our universities have to promote, since we speak of value and humanism, there's one value which brings us together today, which is equality, in particular equality between men and women. You, I think, were quite right to hold this meeting on the State of the Union, because obviously Europe has a greater role to play in the area of equality between women and men. Europe has a role to play to modernize our societies, but also to shift cultural attitudes and stereotypes. There have been progress made recently, but we know that this is still a major issue. In a continent which wishes to be in the forefront of development, the issue of plus or minus 20% is still a curse which weighs on us. What is this curse? Is the fact that women continue to be 20% suffer 20% proportion. They earn 16% less than men. They 20% in parliamentary associations, 18% in major companies, 16% in decision-making positions in the European Commission. Women are still 20% of part-time workers, and therefore they're in a precarious situation. That only applies to 13% of men. These are the figures, and we'll hear these figures often this afternoon. But what I'd like to say is that even more than the cold figures, it is the burning natures of impact which impresses me. These words and these offences and these actions which tell us that despite the progress made, despite the fact that it should be normal for women to hold decision-making posts, there is still widespread doubt about the legitimacy of their position there. There's also doubt about their ability to truly carry out these functions of these positions. If you see a man on a rostrum who very loudly, with his face reddened by and who is shouting through because of emotion, everybody will call him a great leader. But if a woman raises her voice in a public meeting, you'll see the faces of her interlocutors shape a smile and think we all know that women are hysterical. A man who turns out to be a good leader, who carries out is showing his emotions when he does. A woman is considered to be vulnerable. When it's very difficult to think of being a woman and being a leader when you see men haranguing crowds with great vigor, and it's hard for some people to envisage a different type of leadership. One of the great thinkers of our age, Donald Trump, an expert in the women's cause, who used to run Miss Universe contests, says that the only card Hillary Clinton can play is the women's card. This shows us that we still have a long, long way to go, playing the woman's card as if this were a trump, a joker, whereas we know that being a woman today remains an obstacle. Playing the woman's card when the simple fact for a political woman to be to be addressed as a woman leads to puerile opposition in the French Parliament. And I'd like to say, gentlemen, we never comment on your ties, and sometimes your taste is rather doubtful. Neither do we comment on your shirts, which are sometimes too tight, or your unmatched clothes, because that is not the issue, and it's not essential. Perhaps it would be different if we were in Milan during the Fashion Week, but we're in Florence. We're in Florence, where we have De Musées Lorenzachos taking place in this play, where the Marquis defends the Republic before the Duke of Florence, Alexander. She can only do it by going to his bed, and in bed she she makes political speeches, and the answer she receives is, "Why are you meddling in politics? Your role as a little woman should be enough for you." I would like to say that this is a sentence which belongs to the past. In reading that 19th century text which refers to Renaissance Florence, I would like to say that, but that is not true. What we have in these words is something which is deeply and woundingly topical, our small little role as women. This is what many people would like to reduce us to still. But we still want to say, yes, we have ambition. Yes, we also want to lead parties, ministries, countries. And we want to do this because we do have things to contribute in all these fields. I do not believe that because we're women necessarily we'll do a better job, we'll be more empathetic or more generous or show more solidarity. So in other words, I don't think that women can be a category, but since we've been Cartesians for centuries, I believe that we have a different way of looking at power, a more critical, a more clear-minded way of looking at power, which can lead to a change in practices. For example, not believing that those who speak loudest are necessarily right. All our scientific studies tell us that there's no causal effect between the use of your vocal cords and what goes on in your brain. And shouting is no guarantee of truth. And this is something which we're seeing on an everyday basis, proved in France and the United States. And we can't say that we need democratic representativity to rule a country, and this also is a reason for greater balance between women and men. I spoke of the need to deal with major crises in Europe and the great intelligence we need to deal with these crises. Let's look around, and a greater presence of women and visible presence will contribute to solve these crises. We can give examples of this courage. Angela Merkel, whose commitment to migrants really requires respect. Giulia Miccolini, the mayor of Lampedusa, at the forefront of the migration crisis, who was given the Simone de Beauvoir Prize, or Christian Taubira, who spoke before me. These are all people who show how absurd it would be to see leadership as the property of men. And today, with the challenges which we face, we have enough to do not to give up the resources which come from half of humankind, who certainly deserve to have their voices heard, and to live up to the responsibilities. Often when I speak about this issue of equality between women and men, I am told it's normal for you to be sensitive to this issue. You're a woman. And I want to say here that the struggle for equality between women and men is not a reserve for women. Everybody is welcome to take part. We need to remember that acting for the cause of women is not acting for a half of humankind, not just for a few, but for our society as a whole, for more justice and for more fairness. And as I'm saying that, I'm not naive. I know that some people are more sensitive to humanist values than others, but let's say it in another way then. In addition to values, it's also an economic issue. That's what's at stake. There's more money to be made if you treat women more fairly. And there is money to be earned, certainly, because, just to give you an example, when in France the employment rate of women is 9 points lower than that of men, that's a lot of work which is lost. If we had the same employment rate, we would gain in terms of equity and justice, but we'd also gain 0.9% growth per year. So it's also with this type of reasoning that when I was Minister for Women's Rights from 2012 to 2014 in France, I acted in this area. I strengthened existing laws guaranteeing parity, not just in politics, but in all decision-making fora, because I know that on this issue we cannot wait for things to change naturally. We can't leave it to the goodwill of each of us. Either we also will have to wait a long time. And the action I undertook had a concrete effect. France moved from 63rd in the world ranking of equality, gender equality, 63rd in 2012. And in 2014, it moved up to 20th. And with the political empowerment of women in 2012, I also launched with my European counterparts a platform where we called for parity in commissioners in the European Commission and to have truly professional equality in the economic governance of the European Union. We were listened to some extent. Today I'm National Minister for Education, Minister for National Education. I'm the first woman to be Minister of National Education in France. It's a different type of responsibility. Education is essential in the area we're speaking of because obviously we need to combat inequalities at their source in the initial representations which are developed by people. And that's why I'm developing a law to reform the national schooling system. We've been able to do that with a new teaching approach, which we categorize as moral and civic, so as to combat discrimination at all ages. And we also want to train teachers to take this approach. In higher learning and research, France, in each university, has established equality departments and to do away with discrimination stereotypes in higher education too. And our work is recognized at the European level. Next September, we'll be holding the 9th European Conference on Gender Equality in Higher Learning and Research. And I'm very glad that Stefania Giannini has accepted to be present alongside other European decision makers. So, ladies and gentlemen, I've spoken too long, but I want to say how truly glad I am to be in this forum, in this magical place, speaking of Europe and women, because I do believe that these words together take on real sense. I think Europe needs women, women need Europe, and if this afternoon we can make a modest contribution to this, I'll be very glad. Thank you.
I now give the floor to Minister Giannini.
Grazie, thank you. Thank you really, first of all, to the European University Institute for organizing also this year this very important event that through a high quality debate we already heard these very important, very emotional words by my friend and colleague Naja Belkacem from France. I think we have the opportunity to talk about Europe, to talk about our future, to talk about women and the role of women for Europe and of Europe for women, just to take something from your brilliant introduction to our debate today. I'm very proud as Minister of Education, University and Research of Italy that this event has been organized here in Florence, which you know is one of the most important centers of my country for culture, language and art, we can also see in this wonderful Salone dei Cinquecento. And I'm really very happy that EUY, since the 70s, represents here in Florence, in Italy, a very important hub for science, culture, and political debate about global issues, about European issues. And the issue of women, in my opinion, is part of this long-term thinking. And this should become part of the solution for Europe, for this new idea of Europe we need, for this new model of Europe we need, especially now, especially here in the Mediterranean area, in these very troubled times. And I think that this should be really a part of the solution we need if and only if member states, my country, your countries, should adopt a new perspective, a new approach to this issue, and to deliver also different policies in order to have different politics about women, their role in society, their role in this troubled Western world. I think that this process involves also top-down mechanisms, top-down decisions that female leadership can move easily, inspire and guide. We must know, we must remember, especially here in this place, that we have a history and a very important tradition of great women, of great role model in Europe and in Western culture. And we must not forget their contribution to the development of our society. I think it's time to give value to these prominent examples and to recognize their contribution to the scientific, cultural, and social development which is still going on to democracy and freedom. I'm thinking of scientists like Marie Curie. I'm thinking of great educator, very well known all over the world, like Maria Montessori. I'm thinking about this very important high profile of women which found the courage, which found a way to affirm their personality in very difficult times, in some way, far times. And I think that our duty now, first, is to promote the knowledge of these efforts, of their contribution and their results in order to make our young girls, our young women, aware of this role in our society. And in order to make aware that the lifestyle we can have today is part of the process they started then. For this reason, in my country, in my ministry, in the next week, we launch a survey within Italian students, girls and guys, about the famous women they would like to study in history, in physics, in sciences, in politics. They would like to know much more than they find in their books, in their usual sources for information and knowledge. And I'm sure that we'll let emerge profiles and stories not too well known, and we'll give the list to the publisher in order to integrate the books. Because this is the first small step in order to give our tradition, our history, the role it needs, and it'd be worthy to have. Nowadays, we must admit that in the Western world, we see the results of this women progress. Many steps forwards have been made in very many different fields and areas. I'm referring to some very important personalities, also Italian women like Fabiola Giannotti, who's now Director General in CERN in Geneva. But I'm also referring to the many hundreds of thousands of teachers, of educators, of education leaders, who in their communities every day take care of our children, can transmit their knowledge to them and can give education to them. So I think that these women may establish themselves now through their expertise, their competencies, and their professionalism. So we made a step forward to gender equality in this part of the world. But now, we as ruling class have the duty to prepare the right conditions in order to enable and let them prove their capacities, in order to make the further step we need. And as Najat has already said, also, in my opinion, another step for women will be another step for Europe and will be another step for a better society. This is the basis of our political and cultural agenda. Well, our first condition is to give girls and young women equal access to high-quality education, work and leading position, education first. Education first, not only because through education we can acquire competencies, skills, new abilities in international relations, everything we need in society, but also because schools and universities are the only place where cultural stereotypes and disequalities can really be eliminated. So we have to keep in our mind that schools and university will be more and more in the future the right place to work in order to have a better society, in order to have women and men from the same side of the river in some way. So there is no leadership, in my opinion, no leadership for female or male without education. And this is not by chance, maybe because today we discuss about women leadership with two ministers and the past ministers who dedicated our commitment in European governments in the field of education. And for this reason, our first task is to fight global early school leaving, decreased in this area in Italy to more or less 12.7 beyond European target, but is still a very high percentage. And we have to fight against this very important, very impressive process which keeps out from education, keeps out from better opportunities, young women and young men. But this is not only, leadership is not only knowledge and competencies. We know very well that leadership means also being a driver of a group, being able to stimulate a community, to promote and being responsible for a collective empowerment. So the second condition, in my opinion, is women empowerment. And this responsibility cannot be separated from an individual training in what now we call critical thinking, which is try to stimulate, starting from the primary school, the right way to express our individual point of view about the context and to acquire more and more, growing up, the original point of view about the reality around us. And this is the way to make possible to overcome preconceived and prejudice models. We have to continuously educate students and families and sensitize them to equal citizenship and equality. That means, in concrete terms, I believe in myself. I can accept big challenges. I approach fields dominated by men, traditionally dominated by men. And in order to reach this goal, which is not an easy goal, a movement of open mind and consciousness, not merely claim rights as minority, but to steer girls toward an informed and cognitive ambition. They have to know the wide range of opportunities available to their growth, to a better growth. It's a meaningful process that spreads awareness of their own potential beyond barriers, obstacles, and absences. So education, university, and research can again contribute at the highest level as a key factor, also in this process of women empowerment. And I want to mention here our commitment as Italian government in the promotion of STEM among girls. You know, the question, the issue of STEM is a very popular, a very common and usual in the international debate in these times. We do think that science, technology, engineering, and mathematics are fields for all different talents, independent if a person is a male or a female. In the world, just less than 30% of researchers in science and technologies are women. This is UNESCO data of last year. In Italy, it's a bit better than this. We have 38 female students who choose to study STEM disciplines, but we still have only between 20 and 22 researchers in science as women. And you know that the risk we have to have female scientific leadership, to not have female scientific leadership in these fields is a big one. This means that in the next decades, we will be able to mobilize just single and isolated cases of leadership, not a leading class of leaders, of women leaders. But the most important is that considering the role of science and technology for a better society, you know that in order to approach and to find a new solution for the so-called big challenges, something like aging society, health, quality education for all, migrations, everything which have around us, if we want to approach these new issues and to find new solutions, we also need women talent. And so it's quite important that we try to encourage and stimulate our girls to explore these different fields of study, learning, and education. That's the reason why we will discuss together also with my colleague Najat in the next week on the occasion of the G7 organized by Japan, and we'll have the opportunity to propose some initiatives as that I mentioned for Italy, but I'm sure that we have very many other instances of countries which are moving toward this new very important purpose in order to really have an inclusive, sustainable, and equitable society. I think that the focus should be oriented on information campaigns and active policies that involve civil society and women already leaders in their field. I mentioned Fabiola Gianotti, but we also find very many other scientists who are, I'm sure, really available to become testimonial of this campaign. And even teachers and educators should be supported with training programs reinforcing their capacity, their ability to deepen their understanding on gender equality and consequently innovating educational techniques. I think that not to have in the near future so many women leaders in the field of hard sciences and technology should be really a very important, a very big liability for our society. And it should be a real obstacle in order to have a better society that we have. I want to mention, just to summarize, a sentence which Hillary Clinton some years ago, before becoming the official candidate for the Democrats Party in the United States, about this issue. We are in a global competition and we can't afford to leave talent on the sidelines. I think we are still at this moment. We still have the same obstacles and the same objectives. So, first, the lesson of history and its value and the value of great women in the past. Second, education and the role of free access for girls, young girls everywhere to high quality education. And third, last but not least, individual empowerment, which is the basis to understand what is around us and to freely choose and decide. This is, in my opinion, true both for men and women, of course. And this is the crucial condition for democracy and social development. In such a society, women must dare more and more than they did in the past, more than we are doing in the present. And they have to use some words, some special words, such as ambition, leadership, and power, with no fear. They have, in this way, in their hands, the destiny of their life and the destiny, in some way, of our society.
Thank you both for introducing the subject and in such a rich way. The emphasis that it's not just about women, but about our society, reclaiming women from history and looking to the future. Thank you both. Now we open the discussion, and I'll turn immediately to my left to Maria Luz, who was a minister in the last Portuguese government. And you were a minister in hard times, a minister for finance when you actually had to decide to cut. Citizens like governments to do more. They never want governments to do less. So how did you approach the prioritization, the tough choices that you had to make at a very acute period for your country and for your society?
Thank you, Bridget. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for having me here in this panel. It's an honor and a privilege to be in such distinguished company. The question you asked me about how difficult it was indeed tremendously difficult. We were under an adjustment program, so many of the choices involved had actually been made before, when the program was being negotiated still by the previous government. But then, of course, we had to go through the adjustment process, renegotiate targets, reassess measures, adapt to reality, because reality is never exactly what you expect. That's a fact of life. And it was always very difficult. But we had the clear notion of the importance of delivering as a main result the completion of the adjustment program, the return to the ability to market financing, recovering the country's credibility internally and externally, and those goals were the driver of our action. At the same time, we took extreme care and we were extremely concerned in trying to preserve the weakest in our society. So the poor, we were asking for sacrifices more to those who could more, even if it was difficult for everyone. And the choices were all difficult, but that's the point about being in government. It's all about making choices. Even in easiest times, there are never enough resources to do whatever we would want to do. So it's always about choices. And it's those choices and the results that you can deliver with them that actually define the quality of the policies you make. And in that respect, I think that we have complied with what was expected of us by completing the program successfully and actually having a good electoral result after that, even if we are not in government, but that's a separate story.
And can I ask you, how do you respond to the suggestion that you were there to basically to implement austerity?
Well, I'd like to quote the former Prime Minister, the leader of my party, because I think he explains that in a very simple and very clear way. Austerity is not ideology, about ideology. Austerity is what it's left when you run out of money. And it's really quite simple. If you don't have the resources anymore, you have to direct the few resources you have for what is more important or essential. And that has been called austerity. But that is the outcome of a situation that we have inherited, which is we simply ran out of money and the ability to borrow in the market. So there's no ideology there, and as finance minister, I would have loved to be distributing money instead of cutting, as I am sure all my colleagues in government would have preferred. We are not mean, okay? It's not something that we do not like to inflict pain. It's just that we had a mission and we had a program to comply with, and we had in our minds that the real important objectives were to deliver the results that we actually did. So.
Thank you. Now we move to the world of the judiciary. And I'm very pleased that Martha Katabri is with us. We're very honored, a very distinguished alumnus of the European University Institute, now Vice President at the highest court of this land, the Italian Constitutional Court. Martha, perhaps you are a very senior, hold a very senior position within the Italian judicial system now. Perhaps you can talk to us about the position of women within that system.
Yes, thank you very much. And first of all, let me thank my alma mater, the European University Institute, and the President Weiler for inviting me here in such a distinguished panel. Yes, my point of view about women in leadership is the judicial one, and in particular, the Italian judiciary. And in this case, we have figures that are in a way paradoxical. As a member of the Italian Constitutional Court, when I was appointed in 2011, I was the only woman out of 15 members of the Constitutional Court. And even more relevant, the third woman ever in the history of the Italian Constitutional Court. If you consider that the Constitutional Court was established 60 years ago, it is not very much. 15, 60 years, 3 women are numbers that speak by themselves. Now we are 3 women, and it makes a big difference. But what is more relevant is that in Italy, probably unlike many other countries, women outnumber men in the judiciary, generally speaking. We have a report from the Minister of Justice of last year saying that women are more, the number of women is higher than the number of men in the judiciary, but so far no woman has been in the position of being the president either of the Constitutional Court or of the Supreme Court of Cassation or of the Supreme Court Conseil d'État, the administrative court. So there is a big difference. Judiciary is becoming a sort of feminine profession, like teaching, but not at the highest position of the court. There can be a number of reasons explaining this dramatic difference between the ordinary administration of justice and the direct leadership position. Let me recall just a few datas. Until 1963, not so many years ago, Italy had a formal legislative ban for women to be in the judiciary. There was a piece of legislation that was repealed only in 1963, by the way, the year when I was born, so not such a long time ago, when women were not considered, were not allowed to enter the judiciary. And even in that debate, the openness to the bench for women was considered suitable only for some cases, family law, minors, or this kind of issues that were related in some way to the women's role in society and family role in general. We don't have any kind of positive or affirmative action for enhancing the number of women in the judiciary, unlike other public roles, because, for example, in political institutions, you have a number of pieces of legislation that encourages to take women in the list for the election, for example. This is not the case for the judiciary, and this is not the case, at least in the Supreme Court, whereas in other European or international experience, women are taken into consideration in order to do the proper appointment to the bench. So legislation is not helping so much, but as the minister were saying, I think that education and culture is the most important point that can be touched upon in order to change the situation. One can ask why parity matters in the judiciary, but maybe this is for another round, another moment, another answer, another question.
But perhaps you could tell us why you think parity would make a difference.
Well, why not? I would reverse the question. Why not to have women on the bench if women are part of the society? Why is it an issue not to have a woman on the bench? If you consider the arguments that were spent in the debate, for example, in the Italian political debate about repealing that law that banished women from being in the judiciary, there were ridiculous arguments. They say judiciary require rational use of reason, and so what is this was the kind of argument that was spent in the parliament. The first question is why not to have women on the bench, and there are a number of reasons. You can say that it is a matter of impartiality, for example, if a court is required to give a sentence decision concerning women, why not to have in the body taking the decision also the presence of women? You can have other arguments considering, for example, a stronger legitimacy of the court. But in my view, the most important argument in favor of a strong presence of women in the judiciary is related to a richer deliberation process. Judicial decision is a deliberative process where different perspectives, different points of view are indeed very, very relevant. It is not by chance that the basic rule for the judicial process is audi et alterat pars, meaning listen to all the point of view, listen to all the point of view. So among this point of view, Gender matters, age matters, geographical or origin matters, experience matters, professional background matters. The more a court has the possibility of listening to different points of view, the better is justice.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And now we'll move to the to the world of the media. And the media is such a powerful transmitter of our values, of how we view the world. And we're delighted that Sylvia Kaufmann, editorial director of Le Monde, is with us. And I'd like to begin by asking, do you think there's a problem with the portrayal of women in the media? And if I could use one stark example, when Obama cried, given the outrage of his attempts to change the gun laws in the United States, this was seen as a man showing empathy, showing caring. When the High Representative Mogherini cried in the face of the events of Brussels, it was seen as she was weak and she had allowed her emotions overwhelm her. Is this a double standard?
Well, there is probably a problem, since Najat Vallaud-Belkacem also mentioned this in her speech, the profiles, I think you meant, profiles of female politicians in the media apparently drive you mad from time to time. And I agree with you that there is this difference between a man crying on screen and a woman. I'm not so sure it's always negative. It can, it's not only real men who watch TV. A lot of normal men and women also do. So some voters may feel empathy for a female politician who cannot help but crying on TV in reaction to a very dramatic event, who is an emotional thing for everybody, like a terrorist attack. So, you have to have this little nuance also. But, it is true, it's a fact of political life and public life that women have to look good. Hillary Clinton is not allowed to have a bad hair day when Donald Trump has a bad hair day every day, and he thinks it's an asset apparently. So, but this is the way politics are conducted in our countries, and I think we're all a little bit guilty for this. Not only the media, if I may say. It's a culture. Now there is, I think, a problem in the media which is not only misrepresentation, it's also of women, it's also a problem of underrepresentation. And we, in Le Monde, for instance, we have conducted studies and we have noticed that far fewer women are quoted or photographed in the paper compared to their participation in public life. Like, for instance, on the front page, we very seldom have photographs of women, except actresses, because they are, they are in a movie or in a theater play. But we are much more aware of this now as editors. We pay more attention to this, and we don't always find a solution. But this is something we have grown aware of for the past few years, I would say. And there's also an underrepresentation of experts, of female experts quoted. We have noticed that our journalists always go to the male experts rather than the female experts, and regardless of their qualification, but there's a little bit of laziness and also, just habit. And we have also realized that we have had the cases of some women, female experts who are totally qualified, and when journalists call them, they say, I will pass the phone to my boss. That's also a problem that we may talk about later on. But so there is an association of professional women who made an address book of female experts by field, so for journalists in France. So if you are working on an article, on a story on geopolitics, for instance, well, you don't only have those very famous male experts, but you also have very good female experts who maybe are not so present in the media. And here are their phone numbers and their email addresses. If you're working on industry, I don't know, oil industry, well, there you have. So, you know, we are trying to do this kind of affirmative action for to have more representation of women in the media. But it's an uphill battle. It's, I remember on one March 8. March 8 is a nightmare for every female editor because it's the day we have to have women everywhere in the paper, yeah? And an editorial on women, which has to be written by a woman because you'll never get a man, a journalist, a male journalist writing an editorial on women. I don't know why. But so we decided once to have female experts quoted in every story of the paper. This was really very, very difficult to achieve. But you know, it's better than what it used to be, so we are progressing, more or less.
Yes, it is better than it used to be. Women in leadership positions, there are more women. There are more women in politics, more in the judiciary. But there still is a very strong and significant representation gap. Across the world, about 22% of parliamentarians are women. Then in terms of the numbers in government, lower again. In terms of the representation of women on the boards of big companies, again. So can I ask all of you who are women leaders, what are the barriers that you still think exist? But also then, what are the solutions? For example, affirmative action, quota systems. So can I ask you about the barriers, but also then concrete actions, a toolkit that is yet to be developed that would increase the proportion or reduce the representation gap? So perhaps if I can start, Minister, since you're...
Yeah, it works, thank you. Which are the main barriers in order to have more representation than we have now all over the world? I can start from my country and I can start from my personal experience, I think. Starting from my country, I think that to have now, as we have 30% of women members of Italian Parliament is a great result, also considering the comparison with the international percentage you mentioned. And this result depended on the evolution of the Italian society. And the evolution regards the first kind of barrier I also find in my life, which is the expectations of our families, the expectation of our husbands or boyfriends or men who are besides us. And if I think of Italy 20 or 30 years ago, I can say that the most part of women were supposed to have in the middle class, and the average perception of their role in society, first to be good mothers and wives, secondly to have a good quality of education, but not necessary to apply for universities and especially in the science and technology fields. I want to underline once again the importance of these fields which are traditionally dedicated to women teachers, as you mentioned before. Still in Italy, field dominated by the presence of women. We have 95% of women teachers in the primary school, just to have a number which describes very well the situation still now. So the first barrier is the horizon where women and girls grow up. And it's a big change in my country, it's a big change in Europe too, but it's not enough to create absolutely a free field where it's not important if you are a girl or a guy, and you can really reach your ambition and you can go straight on to your personal purpose of life. And the second barrier, I want to say, maybe it's not a popular issue about this discussion of gender and gender equity, is also the aptitude, the mentality of women themselves, because not always women dare, not always women want to become the first chief of a very complex organization. Not always women are, as I told before in my speech, do believe in themselves. And this is a question of condition of the context, of the social context, of the family context. And I think that the models we propose to them is one of the most important tools we have in our hands to change this interior feeling, this aptitude of women themselves. So if you combine these two dimensions of these two sides of the coin, barriers were outside of our consciousness, of our mind, and barriers who are still inside some of us, I think that the result is still what we have also in the Western world, where you can find, for instance, that's the number for Italy, more or less 52, 53 women students in university, in Italian university as average percentage. And you can find 25 associate professors, between 14 and 12 and 14 full professors. And we have now, if I remember well, 4 rectors, women rectors of Italian university. I've been the second in the history of the Italian Republic, and I've been elected rector in a public university 10 years ago, not 50 years ago. So, you know, I think we have to work quite a lot, both sides of the coin, both sides of the field. We have to work on women aptitude, on women mentality, and we have more and more work on expectation which their family, the society has referring to them.
Thank you. Madame. Thank you. First, sorry if I choose speaking in French. I prefer it. It's not because I have any kind of hostility against English, but I think if you are interested by the details of my answer, it's better if I express it in French. So, quelles sont les barrières?
So what are the remaining barriers? That's the most important question on this issue, and it's the question I asked myself when I went to the Ministry of Women's Rights, and I told you I held that position for 2 years. And I did say to myself, today we still see inequalities in the places of power. That's what we're discussing on the employment market, within companies, everywhere. Where are the barriers? If you look historically, the countries around us in Europe and in the world, I think that we can say there are three kinds of barriers. The first one was a legal barrier, but like what you were saying when you said then up to some time ago it was prohibited for women to be judges in Italy, and there was also no suffrage for women up to a certain point. So if you the first thing to do, obviously, is to do away with the legal barriers, to go through all these codes of laws and these acts of law and to get rid of all these things which prevent women from being equal with men. The second type of barrier, after you've done that job and done away all the injustices enacted against women, you will see that in fact there are also obstacles, and these are even more difficult, and therefore you need to have positive legislation. It's not enough to do away with negative legislation. You have to approve positive legislation, such as the laws on parity in politics, and recently in France there was a law on the situation of single women, so that the state can pay their allowances for them, so that these women do not end up in poverty. This is a positive discrimination, so as to do away with a inequality between men and women. Though in the law, there's nothing which says that women are the heads of single-parent families. In actual practices, they're the great majority. And once this has been done, there's a third kind of barrier. And here I agree with Stefania. This is the most difficult one to deal with, and this is the cultural and mental barrier. And that's an issue. I'm currently a Minister for National Education, as I said, and with that responsibility, I have to appoint people to high positions, and in particular rectors. And I'm struck by the fact that when there are posts available and I try to appoint women, I have to call at least 6 or 7 or 8 women before one of them accepts. Whereas if I suggest the position to a man, he accepts immediately. There's a basic difference. Why don't they spontaneously accept these positions as women? Because there's always some doubt as to whether they can actually be able to exercise the responsibility which is offered to them. It's the famous rule of a woman accepting a responsibility if she thinks she has 150% of the skills and requirements, whereas a man will accept it if he's got 60% of what's required. So there's this lack of personal confidence. There are also other things which come into play. Because I talk to them, I know this. There's one way of seeing the responsibilities as exercised, which means that women want to complete the job, the tasks they have, before they take on other responsibilities. These women, for example, who may be deans in departments, and they may say, "Oh, I've only been a dean for 2 years. I want to really do a good job here." So it's a bit like women at school, girls at school, who are more behave better, and they want to complete the job properly because before they get involved in something else. They don't want to have dual responsibilities, and this is the kind of thing which men worry about a lot less. As I said, the mental cultural barrier is the most difficult one. The only way to really get rid of this barrier is through education. So it's funny that I've moved to the Ministry for National Education, because it means that from very young you have to act against stereotypes, against the stereotypical role of women. And the fact that in France, up to the 6th grade, girls are much better than boys in maths and science. So why is it that a few years later we find that they're a minority in engineering departments or scientific departments? So it's a question of the models which boys and girls receive, and have to do with the stereotypes, and we have to give confidence to all of them to be able to achieve what they want to achieve. And finally, Sylvie Kaufmann, I've always considered that education, to a large extent, is something which is channeled through schools, but for some of this is also channeled through the media, through cinema and television. That also has to have a very important role in regular campaigns to promote women to leadership positions that would help other girls who don't believe in themselves and who can gain confidence from that.
Thank you. I would agree with much of what was said before about the barriers. Things are changing fast. There is an important element on the actual availability of women to accept certain roles. And that has been an issue for myself. In the financial world, men are clearly dominant. So when we are looking for people for certain jobs, typically the list of men who could do the job is much longer than the list of women. And then we had the problem that many of the women would simply not accept because they have other projects, and maybe the appeal of leadership or the appeal of becoming a public figure is less visible in women than it is in men. I hate stereotypes, and I think that we are fundamentally human or people, so we are all different. But still, on average, men take more easily a role of dominance than women do. And that makes many women less available to do so. But there's also the role of the family and of the choices. There are biological differences which cannot be overcome, and thank God for that. I mean, we still bear the children, and that makes us, at least for a certain period of time, to take a role where we cannot be replaced. And that means choices. And those choices do not necessarily have to be seen as something hurting your career for the future. They can be very conscious choices and things that many women I know who can be very successful do not have any regret because they have decided to dedicate 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years of their lives to be with their children when they are smaller. So knowing obviously that in many cases it's a problem of discrimination and difficulty that does not allow them to access certain roles, let's not think that in many cases it's not a natural option that we are also entitled to have. I mean, women are also entitled to choose to have children or stay at home or have a part-time. It can be a choice, it can be lack of choice, but let's not put it all as if it was the same thing. And obviously education is key. I am particularly fortunate because no one ever in my family, parents, grandparents, ever thought of saying to me or my sisters that there was something we couldn't do because we were women. I don't think that genuinely that idea even crossed their mind. So we grew up knowing that we could do whatever we wanted to. And this family environment is absolutely key. So given the very crucial role that women have with small children, it is primarily our obligation to tell our children, boys and girls, that they can be whatever they want, be it boys or girls. And women do have that capacity because we have access to children when they are in the very beginning of their lives. And I would like to give this example and ask to people who have children of the two genders, boys and girls. I only have boys, so to me it's not an issue. But for those who have boys and girls, how many of those people, women or men, actually differentiate on the tasks they ask their children to do? and how much that influences the choices that they will make in the future. Sometimes it's these very small things you do on your daily life, in your family, in your home, that create constraints for the future. And that part of the combat for equality is something that anyone can do in their daily lives. And it's often not that much referred to. We think about policies and barriers and laws and quotas, which are all important. But first and foremost, it begins with us at home when educating our children. And just one final note, because I think that indeed women are subject to a higher pressure, because with quotas, and I generally agree with quotas as a way to force mentalities to change quicker. It sort of pushes changes which are needed, but then women are required to be even better than men, because they're also required to prove that they are more than quota fulfilling. So in general, when women get to higher positions, on average, and of course with exceptions, they do tend to be better than the average man who would get to that position. And I realize I'm talking too much, sorry.
No, Martha.
I think that we are almost running out of time, so I don't want to repeat no one of the many things that have already been said, and I agree completely about culture, mentality, family role, and so on and so forth. Just a few sentences. My experience is that when I belonged to the academy, my previous work was in the academy, professor of university constitutional law, being a woman was not at all an issue. It was not at all an issue, neither for my job nor for leadership position. It has become an issue in the judiciary. So why this difference? I think that the most relevant barrier, in a way, is the demographic composition of the court. In a court that is made out of 15, 14 men and 1 woman, is less likely that a woman become the Chief Justice rather than a man. But this does not imply, and this is the point that I would like to underline in the few minutes, that all men are barriers to women leadership. It is not true. In my experience, it can be an obstacle, but I've also met a number of men that are the first and strongest supporters of women. So, taking for granted all what you said about family role, culture, availability of women in taking some position, and all the rest, a lack of positive legislation, all the rest, my point is here that we can find also some allies also on the other side of the gender barriers.
Thank you. Sylvia.
I agree. Especially men if they have daughters. Yes, men who have daughters are more sensitive to this issue and will be stronger allies, I agree. I only have sons, so I don't have it. But I'll also be very brief. My advice is don't wait for the barriers to be lifted. Lift them yourselves. Go for it. Don't feel a victim. Don't behave as a victim even if you are discriminated against. I think the situation is much better than it was some time ago. Be the best. Push your own ideas and don't just let them circulate so that your male colleagues will grab them and say that it's their own ideas. So just go for it.
Well, can I say that that is the best advice for all of those young women in the audience? Just go for it. Unfortunately, time has run out. I apologize to the audience that I wasn't in a position to have questions from the floor. can I leave you with a slogan, 50-50, latest by 2050? And also, can I ask you not just to thank, but to salute these wonderful women leaders that we have before us. Come on. Brava, brava. Thank you, and thank you for bringing in the domestic, because it was not. It was not.
This is nice. Yeah. Okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, we thank you for your understanding that we have to revisit the seating of the first 3 rows. Thank you for your cooperation. Gentili signore, gentili signori, la ringraziamo di ben voler collaborare a riorganizzare le 3 prime file. Grazie tante della collaborazione.
Francesca. Ciao.
Stavo pensando, scusa, qui sono tre e Renzi parla dal podio, però sta arrivando, mi ha detto la cosa. E questo? Io sto dicendo no.
Ladies and gentlemen, Prime Minister Renzi is about to arrive. Thank you very much for taking your seats. Gentili signore e signori, grazie di prendere il posto. I primi ministri arrivano.
should sit in the middle. Pardon? Okay. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, we reach almost the end of our splendid day. I have with me the Prime Minister of Malta, Mr. Muscat, and on my left, Tony Barber of the Financial Times. And we are going to grill you now. So, Tony.
Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, or should that be good afternoon stroke evening. We're very pleased to have with us Joseph Muscat, Prime Minister of Malta. Perhaps I could begin by observing that today, just about an hour or so's drive south of Florence in Rome, Pope Francis was receiving the Charlemagne Prize and gave a speech in which he made quite a, as I, at least from what I read, quite a heartfelt plea for compassion on the part of European leaders and European societies to deal with the tremendous challenges that they face, including the migration challenge. Did you feel that this is an appeal that resonates with you, your government, and your fellow leaders around the European Council table?
Well, I think that the issue is not whether His Holiness' words resonate with us. We have been saying the same things for quite a number of years now. So while I'm very glad and I think that the prize is totally merited by the Pope, by His Holiness, I don't think that the effect will be one that will be felt further than the words of, the usual words of support, of saying that one agrees with the Pope. But when push comes to shove, I think that nothing has changed, or very few things have changed. And that's why we need a debate on policy. And maybe what Italy has proposed with the Migration Compact is the first real serious attempt at putting in not just the idea of compassion, but a policy toolkit that would go in hand with the proposed changes in the Dublin system, that would go in hand with the ailing system of relocating migrants that has been put forward in the past few months, to see whether we can move forward on all this. Yesterday, I was pretty struck with what Jean-Claude Juncker said. He spoke about part-time Europeans and full-time Europeans, on part-time Europeans on giving and full-time Europeans on taking. I would concur with that, but I would also say that many Europeans feel that they are like workers in a precarious position, people without a contract, knowing exactly what is expected of them, but not knowing really what Europe means to them. And I do believe that the walls that we are seeing coming up, both physically and metaphorically in terms of policy around Europe and within Europe itself, are a symptom and not a cause of the malaise that there is. Some time ago, I was having a chat with a friend who told me that given the fact that the only structure visible from space is the Great Wall of China, any alien would be justified in thinking that we are quite fond of walls as a race, as a human race. The fact is that walls are, in all senses, walls are a symptom of insecurity. And they come, or they are erected, when there is a lack of trust. So I really think that what we need to invest in right now is the fostering of trust amongst nations. And that trust, I'm sorry to say, doesn't really exist, or is at its lowest levels since the creation of the European Union.
So how do you go about doing that?
So I think that, first of all, I think the prerequisite is economic growth. I do think, so let me start by being a bit positive. I think that the crisis, in plural, that we are going through are sowing the seeds of success in the future. And I do think that we have to go through a deeper crisis of identity in Europe before the new Europe emerges, necessarily so. I do think that economic growth is a prerequisite to fostering trust, to fostering the idea that we are one and that is not just a collection of member states. Because if you look, I see some of the rules we are coming up with as forms of walls. Everyone is saying, okay, a country is erecting a wall here, a wall there, but really and truly, even the rules that we adopt from time to time are political walls because we don't trust each other. We don't trust each other with managing migration. We don't trust each other on the managing of our budget. We don't trust each other with dealing with bureaucracy, with opening up our markets. So really and truly, I think the primary focus should be economic growth. We maybe, as a continent, lost the touch to make that happen, and I do think that that should be the #1 priority right now.
Shall I borrow this? Okay. When you talk about lack of trust, however, one can also see this as a problem within nations and within individual societies, not just something across the whole European Union. And by that I mean the failure to deliver robust economic growth in a number of countries is a failure at national level, not necessarily at EU level. And therefore the mistrust you're talking about expresses itself in the growth of unconventional political movements at national level. Would I be right in thinking that much of the solution, even the greater part of the solution, needs to come at national level? The restoration of economic health is a national issue.
Definitely, it is a national issue. So if I speak from national experience, as the smallest member state, we have registered a 6.3% growth in our economy last year, which is the second largest in the EU and one of the highest over the past few years across this continent. And we have done it because we have pulled down more bureaucracy, we have decreased our bureaucracy, we have made our jobs market more flexible, we have made our energy market, we have invested in our energy market, we have opened up. And that is really what each and every country is trying to do right now. The issue is whether EU rules help you to do that or not. It is a matter of priority, because really and truly, and this is not Brussels bashing, I would not subscribe to the idea that anyone who says something about EU rules is some sort of anti-austerity or anti-Brussels or or anti-federalist. This is the truth. Sometimes we have to admit it, at least I have to admit it as a head of government, some of the rules are contradictory in terms. And when we are around the table as 28, sometimes one thing we say during the first part of the meeting is in complete contradiction with the second part of what we say later on. So this is not to paint a gloom and doom scenario. This is actually to say that, yes, it is our responsibility, but that Europe has to change also itself to make it easier for us to achieve this growth. Tony was asking also about national movements of anger. Tony Blair this week described politics right now as being polarized between the politics of anger and the politics of answers. I do subscribe to that sort of analysis. What I don't agree with him on is the sort of idea that people who vote for fringe movements are some sort of freaks. They might be led by freaks, they might be led by some clowns, but I do think that most of the people who vote for anti-politics movements are nice people, are good people, are people who are genuinely afraid of losing their job, who are genuinely afraid that the political class is not delivering for them, that think that Europe is far away, that think that their government is far away, that think that their municipality is far away. And I think that as politicians, as mainstream politicians from right and left, what we haven't done so far is distinguish between the leadership of such movements and the people who vote for such movements. I think that we need to engage more, understand the reasons that are driving people away from mainstream parties, and when they're driving, when people are driven away from mainstream parties, the result would be havoc for sure.
But can I just push you a little bit, Prime Minister, on the relationship of growth? Because some of the countries which at least until now have not had spectacular growth, like Italy, have been the most generous and welcoming to migrants. And some countries which will remain nameless, which actually had quite significant growth, have been the most hostile and reticent.
Yes, true, and it is not necessarily...
Sì.
So I'm not saying that this is something that there is a sort of perfect formula. I also do think that the flip side of, or not the flip side, but really and truly part of the equation of economic success is that more people want to relocate where there is economic success. No one wants to move where there aren't jobs. So in itself, the idea that people want to go to certain countries is a reflection that those countries meet the aspirations of people. And I do think that, say, what's happening from what I follow here in Italy with what happened with the Jobs Act is something that needed to be done for so many years, and finally someone had the guts to do it. And while maybe the growth numbers are not spectacular, they are much healthier than they ever used to be. So I do think that in itself, the attraction of certain countries for migrants is a sort of reflection that they can meet the aspirations of those people.
Can I ask you specifically about the European Union's agreement with Turkey on the transfer back of refugees who have been moving through Turkey into southeastern Europe? Do you think this is going to be in any danger as a result of the resignation of Prime Minister Davutoglu? And do we think that President Erdogan is someone who will stick to the deal as agreed?
So I do not think that there is an illusion that anyone signed up to this agreement with some sort of very big enthusiasm. But this was the best deal that there was on the table, and I think it was the right choice to go for it. I also think that whatever Turkey does, really and truly, the fact that here we're discussing whether the success or failure of a European policy depends on one single foreign leader is in itself very worrying. It shows that there is not the embeddedness of a concrete long-term policy that one would never dream that it would be in jeopardy because of one person or another. Having said that, I do believe that the Turkish president will keep his word. What I think is more urgent is the fact that we need to look further. We need to look to how to help countries that are friends of ours. Lebanon, Jordan. I've been to Lebanon and Jordan some weeks ago. They feel abandoned. And the message they give they give us is that, yes, please do help the migrant community, help the desperate people, but help also those countries, those host communities that are going through great strains in order to play as host. We have to look at Africa. So right now, the deal with Turkey is costing more, maybe rightly so, as I'm not contesting the amount that has been given to Turkey, but if one looks at proportions, we're investing more in the deal with Turkey than we're investing in Africa as a whole continent. And when I meet African leaders, they tell me, where's the beef at the end of the day? How do you expect us to take you seriously if right now you're not really showing us any sort of investment? And that's where maybe the discussion on the migration bonds comes in. Maybe there are many permutations to the idea. Maybe there can be alternatives to that. But at least we have, for the first time, a discussion on a financial instrument that can be used. Maybe we might agree, maybe we will not agree. I myself, I'm very open to be convinced on this, and I'm very open to the ideas against this. But at least, finally, we have one idea on how to finance all this.
Now, from where you stand in Valletta, so close to the North African coast, you probably have as better a perspective than any other European Union head of government about whether the deal with Turkey has in any way influenced migrant flows from Libya and Egypt. What is your assessment of?
Of course it has. So over the past few weeks, and that's not something we were surprised. So during the meeting we had where we closed the deal with Turkey, Matteo and myself were saying during the same meeting, yes, let's do this deal, but this is not a solution, right, or not the solution. This might solve for some time the pressure on one particular route. And we have seen a transfer of that pressure to Egypt, to Libya, which will only increase. So it is a delusion to think that this has ended, or and that is why Libya is a priority. I was in Tripoli 2 days ago for just a couple of hours, and you can feel the tension. Right. You can feel that there is something happening, that finally things might have started moving. And we have finally a government that wants to engage. So for me, I think it's pretty obvious that that is a prerequisite, the need to engage, the need to have an interlocutor. But I'm usually a very positive person, and I will keep being positive. But the fact is that when it comes to migration, we have solved temporarily one route, but other routes are opening up. And it's pretty obvious that today or tomorrow or the day after, we will be in for some considerable influxes.
Yeah. Now, just looking at the issue of migration from another angle, that's to say the long-term demographic outlook for many European countries, the need of certain economic sectors for skilled immigrant workers over recent decades, over future decades. We hear almost a total unanimity of views among economists and experts in industry on this point, but it clearly runs up against the problem that societies as a whole aren't prepared for the levels of immigration over decades, admittedly, but nevertheless, the levels that are by general consent deemed necessary to keep the EU economy on a not just a growth path, but a path where the future high-tech sectors of the economy flourish. Now, how do you? Is there some way of talking to European societies now about this when feelings are so raw as a result of the huge difficulties that the EU had in controlling the surge in migration last summer?
That is why economic growth is a prerequisite. Because it's a chicken and egg situation, yes, really and truly. But right now, most of the citizens of Europe are not feeling the urgency of that need to import people. So I'm pretty sure, and as an economist myself, I do subscribe to the idea that we need migrants. The fact is that people don't buy it, or at least they think that this is some sort of thing that politicians have come up with to conceal their failure. It isn't. It is a reality. Right now, I think the only way to come out of this in a way that we can be proud to be called Europeans is equity and fairness in the way we shoulder this burden. There can be so many ways in which we have a distribution key. But the fact I can speak for my own country. We had a surge in xenophobia at a time where no one really was taking notice of the huge influx we had. Maybe because we're the smallest member state, no one really cared that we have a couple of thousands of people coming over, which for us was quite considerable and made a huge strain on our society. Right now, we are trying, playing our small part, to play a contribution. We had two choices as a government. We could have said, when it came to the redistribution key, we have paid our price over the years, no one really took any notice of us, so we don't want to take part. Yeah. Or, as we did, we said, we're taking people ourselves. We're taking people from Italy, people from Greece. And people are now realizing that if there are sustainable and manageable numbers, migration can be a good thing. Right. But I think that is the key to all of this, fairness and equity.
Right. Joseph?
Can we turn to the issue of security? There's a kind of contradiction in the history and the discourse of European integration. The one area which was always held as the core of sovereignty, defense, security, is the very area where no member state on its own can really take care of its own security and its own defense. So there seems to be a mismatch between the potential and actual threats that Europe make and willingness of member states also in this area to adopt common policies and a more efficient use of resources.
It boils again to the issue of trust. I think because we're not really trusting each other. I do think that when it comes to defense policy, and we see this as a neutral country, the next obvious step is the sharing of information between member states, which is still at ridiculously low levels. One wouldn't expect to find a situation where there are countries which are so reluctant to share basic information amongst each other. So if we start with that, I think that would be an incredible first step ahead. I also do think that the issue of security needs to be approached not from a dogmatic point of view. So I come from a socialist and social democrat party. For many years, the issue of security was seen as an issue of the right. That anyone from the left saying that people need to feel safe at home, that there is an issue, there is an aspect of migration that has to do with security and not just a humanitarian crisis. It is a humanitarian crisis, but there is a security element to it. That if you're tough on criminals, you're sort of betraying the values of the left. That's not the truth. Our values as politicians, as mainstream politicians, are meant to make sure that people are safe in their homes. So I do think that people don't trust governments, and that lack of trust is on the increase, and then it leads to governments not trusting each other.
One of the big events of this week has been the Republican presidential race and the position we're in now, which is that Donald Trump appears to virtually have the nominations sewn up and would therefore be competing in November, most likely against Hillary Clinton. Looked at from a European perspective, what does this tell us about American society, American politics, and about the US-EU relationship after November, possibly particularly affecting the idea of the big free trade deal?
I'm not too comfortable in commenting about the American society when we're not in that much of a good shape ourselves. Yeah. So if you look at candidates standing for elections in some of our countries and winning elections in some of other countries, there might not be as colorful as Trump, but their ideas might be as, how can I say, I'm not a diplomatic person, but they might be problematic. Let's put it that way. What does it say for the relations between Europe and America? It says that our societies are facing the same strains at the end of the day. And I don't think we should sneer upon those Americans who are voting for Trump or are rooting for Trump. And once again, I think that between Trump and those people voting for him, there's a huge difference. And we need to go to the root why people are going in that direction. And that's why most of the time there is a sort of reluctance from mainstream politicians to acknowledge the issues that are really troubling people. Are the solution the populist solution that are being offered by those kind of politicians? No, they are not. But it seems to me that the solution to us in the face of populism is to ignore the issue. If we ignore the issue, if we leave a vacuum, it will be that space would be taken up by extremists.
Yes. Would you be in your eyes other factors that explain this lack of trust between citizens and their governments, among governments which were not only economic? Because until now you seem to hinge most of what you said on lack of growth. But maybe there's an even deeper sort of malaise in our democracies.
I think it has to do with rule of law. I think it has to do with some politicians not keeping their word. I think it has to do with lack of social justice at the end of the day. So I think that the flip side to economic growth is social justice. There cannot be any social justice unless you first create the wealth to redistribute. On the other hand, wealth creation without social justice simply creates oligarchies. So I do think that there are these elements. There is not one single answer, but there is an element, a strand, where at one point in time most politicians lost touch with the electorate.
And yet the political program that linked wealth creation with social justice in this way came to a shuddering halt in Europe in 2008-9 with the financial crisis, did it not? And the question at that point was how to shore up the financial system. Did you not feel that social democracy at that point kind of failed to meet the challenge of the hour by accepting that it would, in power, it would turn to taxpayers to fund the rescue of the financial system?
I think our failure as social democracy and as social democrats was in actually not being realistic enough with our voters. I think that our failure as a political family in general, and I say this quite openly within our family, is that we have become conservatives. So most of the political narrative of most, not all, left-leaning political parties in Europe is not to change things, to defend what we have, not to let others do the changes.
Status quo.
Yes, and that's conservatism. We have to stand for being, we are reformists. We need to say what type of changes we need, what differences from the present society rather, and it's not about turning the clock backwards, it's about reinventing ourselves. And part of the problem is that I believe we haven't realized that our failure lies in our success. No one is today contesting the fact that people should have a 40-hour week. No one is contesting that women should have a vote. No one is contesting that there should be retirement pensions. Those were all the huge battles of the left. And now they're coming round. And it seems to me that most of us are like becoming a sort of pressure group to make sure, it's like a conservation society. Let's make sure nothing changes. When it has to be, let's make sure that the changes that happen make us gain even more successes in the future.
Yes, yes.
Now, I might be expelled for saying this, so...
No. I want to come back on two issues. One on the European Union. Last night I had a public interview with three of the leaders of the European Union. And the same kind of issues came up. And they also, in a sort of polite way, as you have been, have pointed the finger at the member states. And when we talk to politicians in the member states, they say it's the fault of the rules of the Union. If you could have one reform of the European Union, the most important one, wave a magic wand, and that would happen, what would it be?
The full implementation of the single market. I think that is really and truly what is most realistically achievable and can lead to exponential economic growth and can lead us out of this vicious cycle of austerity and anti-austerity. So if I had that magic wand, I would say completion of the single market, especially in services.
And by that you mean, I was going to say services in particular,
yes,
but you would mean the digital economy and...
Including the digital economy. So if you look at the things to do when it comes to the completion of the single market, it's like the progress has stalled over the past decade or so. It has to change, and I think if we do that, there is so much potential that is still untapped. And this is not just rhetoric, it's facts. There are studies to show that, and it's the protectionism of some and the reluctance of others that is stopping that from happening. So I would say, number one priority, completion of the single market.
There's another issue I have to raise, and I want to hear your views. We had today a series of spectacular speeches and panels that pointed out that although for many of us in our day-to-day living, it does not seem to us to be priority number one. If somebody came and said, well, do you have a gender discrimination issue in your society? We would say, well, there might be some, and yet today we heard horrific statistics, both as regards violence, but also in economic terms. Untapped economic potential because of overt and covert forms of discrimination in the workplace, which prevent women fully utilizing their productive force. Where do you think that should be in our order of priorities?
Very high, and I think that there are very clear solutions to that. So I think women should be given more visibility. So when it comes to decision making, we have taken a decision as a government back at home to elect, for the second time in our history, a woman as head of state. That in itself gives a very clear signal to women in what is essentially quite a conservative society. Secondly, we have decided that 50% of nominations in our judiciary should be women. because I think that almost naturally women are more prone to doing justice than men are. That's a sort of impression I have. Thirdly, by making sure that women are more financially independent. I think that is essential. So in our case, we have been the highest achievers when it comes to improvement of access to the labor market by women over the past few years. We still need to do a lot more. But we took one simple policy decision. So in what is essentially a very traditional society, there was a huge resistance to women going out to work, saying women need to care for kids. And childcare is unaffordable and that sort of thing. So we took a very bold decision. We said, and we did our studies, if we afford every working parent, single parent or married people or people living together, who go out to work, if we afford them free childcare, we will have a direct injection in our economy of potential that has never been tapped. We've been doing it for the past 2 years. We're the only country in Europe, and I believe we're the only country in the world providing universal free childcare. It's a European experiment and a European success. And it's costing us nothing, in the sense that the amount of economic input that's coming from all that the amount of productivity that has increased in our economy justifies such a bold move.
Tony, you have the last question.
Well, I feel that no discussion of the present and immediate future of the EU would be complete unless we touched on the subject of the forthcoming referendum in Britain next month. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, I have already expressed them quite publicly in a speech I gave to Chatham House. I think that whatever the UK decides, and I think it should vote to remain, obviously. And I speak as a person who was educated in the United Kingdom. I do think that there isn't enough realization in Britain that if there is Brexit, the type of European Union the UK would need to negotiate with would be quite a different European Union, with quite a different approach. To be very clear, I think there would be some countries that would need to prove that exit from the European Union is very ugly, very expensive, and very painful. And that in itself would mean a transition from someone who is part of a family to a polite relationship with a neighbor. But these are the facts. These are the facts that might happen. I'm quite optimistic that people in the United Kingdom will vote to remain.
Tony Barber, Prime Minister Muscat, thank you very, very much. The Prime Minister spoke of the need for reform. And now it's my distinct honor and pleasure to invite one of the great reformers of our epoch to take the podium and give the closing speech to the State of the Union, Prime Minister Renzi.
Grazie mille.
Many thanks, President Weiler. Thank you, Joseph. Authorities, citizens, lecturing staff at the European University, for me it's a pleasure and a great joy to be able to bring the voice of the Italian government to this edition of the State of the Union. An edition which is particularly interesting also with regard to the trip from Rome to Florence with Joseph, who was guiding the discussion with the representatives of the European Union. So I'd like to thank everybody. I will be, at the end of my statement, referring again to the European University Institute. I wish to greet the city of Florence. As a former mayor, it was fun for me to go back through my normal work entrance to enter the Salone del Cinquecento without being seen. But then I realized that I had to salute the standard of the city of Florence, the Golfalone, which is something which all guests should do to the most extraordinary symbol of this city of beauty, a city of culture, but a city of values. This standard has the gold medal of the resistance. My greetings to Joseph Muscat, Prime Minister of Malta, who is most importantly a friend, as well as the head of the government of a friendly country. Joseph has been through the most difficult moments. Perhaps since I've been in Rome, the most difficult moments have been the ones which have been linked to the migration issue. The whole of Europe is now discussing migration. The whole of Europe is now debating and thinking of these issues. But a year and a half ago, we were practically on our own in dealing with these issues, and the closeness and the support of the Prime Minister of Malta was, for me, a very, very significant thing. And his age means that he's one of the youngest leaders in the European Union. The French Minister for National Education is also representative. There are a lot of people who have significant responsibilities in government independently of their age, and I think this is an important fact. After the glorious season of the Founding Fathers, it's up to us now to their children to not just cruise along, but I think that too many people, unfortunately, think that Europe is something which has been handed down, of which you can simply use the yield without doing nothing and not needing to invest for the future. And also, my special greetings to all women. This edition is devoted to women's issues. In the front row, not just in the front row, we have eminent ministers, representatives of the Italian Constitutional Court, ambassadors, diplomatic attaches. We have the deputy mayor, the representative of the municipal council, many women who are in positions of responsibility. I feel that still too little is said about women in the world, and Europe should, as the Union, really highlight the issue of women's rights on the global level. I think the time has come, for example, for member states to decide a shared initiative with institutions within the United Nations, for example. We have been focusing on some historic battles of Italy. I'm thinking of female genital mutilation and issue of marriages with children. I think that this is a battle which should be conducted more forcefully by European institutions as a whole. Now, I've never missed a State of the Union for geographical reasons. We are very proud to host this as the city of Florence. Mayor Nardella, I'm sure, is just as proud as I was, and I've seen that this event is acquiring increasing depth in analyzing the European debate. But I do want to express my position very very briefly, also because we tend to close shop in Florence around 7 p.m. So I don't want to take up too much of your time, but I also want to be a little provocative, starting by one assumption. The best thing said about Europe, as we were reminded in the discussion we just heard, the best thing said about Europe in recent years was said by a non-European, by Barack Obama in recent days. Not only because when he's called to major events, the President of the United States manages to find a key to interpretation in his public speeches, which combines the tone of emotion with the tone of vision and reason. And I think we know a lot about this in Europe, or his speech in Berlin during the election campaign in 2008, and also some things. I remember a very difficult speech he made in Tucson, in Arizona, after the killing of some children, one of the many killings due to the use of firearms in the United States, and also after the defeat at the New Hampshire primaries in 2008, the first time he used the Yes We Can formula, and many other words which have been spoken by President Obama. But when he spoke of Europe, he said something. He did something more than reaching for emotions. He told us who we should be, who we are. It's as if someone found an ID card which had been lost under a pile of documents, reminding us what Europe should be. And I would like to remind the ruling class of this city, and it is something which should be read and reread. I'm sure that many of you have read this, but it is something which is also provocative for us to some extent. What is Europe today? Pope Francis today, in his address at the Sala della Reggia in the Vatican, started from a question: what has happened to Europe? Why this fatigue and this resignation? Why have these become part of your lexicon? Why have we lost that deep sense of mission which drove the progress of Europe through? It was a very difficult and fastidious and boring progress towards that mission. It's as if the deep sense of the vocation of Europe had been lost. So very briefly, I'd like to refer to the catchphrases of the Italian government this year with regard to Europe, because I'm interpreting the State of the Union as an opportunity for the Italian government at this prestigious venue to say something about the battles we've conducted. In 2014, the key word was flexibility. You may recall we just established our government in May 2014. We were looking forward to taking over the presidency of the Union, and we started from a consideration that the fiscal compact and the fiscal regulations of the European Union were a big mistake in the way that they were conceived. Not because one shouldn't pay attention to accounts, something which is necessary, certainly, in all countries and in Italy, but because that way of implementing the fiscal compact would have caused an unprecedented economic and social catastrophe. During the semester, we strove to emphasize a number of concepts with regard to flexibility, and this was a battle which we gained. The new Commission made it possible to use flexibility in 2015. Too little for us, but at least the principle was accepted. Later, we stressed the need for a European approach to migration. 2015 for Italy was the year of a battle on migration, a battle in which we were alone initially, accompanied solely by our Maltese friends, and really only you and I, Joseph, were in the front line. In fact, Joseph at one council meeting said, in this room only Malta and Italy can allow themselves of luxury of saying we haven't changed our mind. And he was right. The battle on migration is something which I'll come back to later, is still in progress, and there will need to be further input. But there is one clear fact: nobody today says that the issue of migration is an issue which only concerns individual countries. Everybody recognizes that it is a general issue. And I want to be clear here, without running the risk of triggering a unnecessary political argument in Italy. Even the governments of the past, even those with different political views in the past, said that the migration issue was solely a national issue. Well, to say this even more plainly, in Italy, even when the right wing was in power, the goal was to say, no, we will deal with migration on our own. Why? Because the law that was enacted then, Bossi-Fini, was not looked on with favor in Europe, and so the government at the time in Italy claimed to have exclusive responsibility for migration issues. In my opinion, and not only did that government made a mistake, and we've had a complete reversal of the position. We've moved from the logic of Dublin, where all the responsibility is shouldered by the countries of arrival, to an approach which tries to find some kind of shared responsibility. What's the key word for the Italian government in 2016? I will surprise you. It's not the economy and it's not migration. It is culture, education. I want to be very responsible with you and with myself. There is an issue of the migration issue is of huge import. It has not been solved, also because what's happening in Turkey raises a further question mark with regard to the agreement between the European Union and Turkey. I endorse what Joseph Muscat said, saying that we've always claimed that that could never be considered the solution. Not only because Italy recently has presented the Migration Compact. We're actually in the second release, version 2.0 of the following up the discussion on migration issues, which places Africa center stage. We were at in Valletta, where we discussed aid to Africa, and as was previously stated, we give a lot less to Africa than we give to Turkey. Well, it's something which needs to be discussed. We've suggested a number of countries as interlocutors of the first phase, the provisional phase. They're not necessarily the coastal states on the Mediterranean, but also sub-Saharan states. And these are states where we can take a strategic option. But I have to be clearly, if we say we have to help them at home, which is a tendency. Some people say this generously, other people say this because they simply don't want to have much to do with them. If we want to help them at home, we can't cut our funding for international cooperation. If we want to help them at home, we can't have a funding mechanism which is decidedly less than that of China, which turns up with infrastructures, with turnkey infrastructures and with all the financing ready. But it's also less than what other countries do. We need to be intelligent enough to place a bet on Africa, realizing that that is our interest. It's in our interest. It's not just ethical, but also useful. The growth rates in Africa in coming years will be higher than those for Southeast Asia. Obviously, there's an issue of democracy and human rights. There is a major question with regard to development and peace in some areas. Africa is the area where extremism is taking on the most dangerous shades, from Al-Shabaab to Boko Haram, from the presence of Daesh in northern Africa to extremely worrying situations where we have Al-Qaeda militants in some parts of Central Africa. There is a major issue about security in Africa, but Africa is unavoidably the future of Europe. It's hard to understand that our Chinese friends have understood this without Europe realizing this. So we have the issue of the agreement with Turkey. There's a proposal of Italy, which has been supported by the Commission and other countries on Africa. It is a comprehensive and strategic proposal. But most of all, if you allow me, with regard to the issue of migration, there is a truth which we need to tell ourselves. If you base all your action on fear, you're going to lose. In any case, if you think that you can tell the world that immigration is a disaster, is an invasion, as some politicians and some communicators in Italy say, when Italy has taken in from the beginning of the year 28,000 people. More than 1 million were taken in by Germany last year. Lebanon, with 4 million inhabitants, has 1.5 million to 2 million refugees within its borders. Jordan is a tiny country which is taking care of more than 1 million refugees. In Southeast Asia, we have huge migratory phenomena. If you just play the card of fear, you've already lost the game. But not because you are incapable, but it's because if you play the card of fear, those who are best at building monsters win. If you are going to be a demagogue trying to catch up with other demagogues, people will prefer the original to the copy. And we're seeing this in the presidential elections in Austria. And there is one issue. Last year, we undertook some self-criticism in the city. There was a major problem. The Tiburtina station, for a fortnight, on the front pages of newspapers, there was pictures of the Tiburtina station in Rome. It's not something which was managed by the Italian government, I must admit. I take on my responsibility for that. We didn't manage this situation well. But these were 200 people at the station, and after a few hours there were 50. Now I think of France. We have Neuchâtel, I think of France, and Calais, where for months there have been basically settlements of thousands of people. I think of people arriving in Germany, which we saw in some pictures, and I think of Greece and the Balkan route. I think of the discussion in many other European countries. We must beware of launching a message in which words as heavy as stones are used randomly. There is no invasion in our country if 28,000 people arrive over 4 months. Certainly, we suggest an agreement with Africa. We suggest helping them at home. We suggest investing in international cooperation. We suggest different kinds of investments to be made. But if you play the card of fear, if you go back to building walls, you don't know where you're going to end up. Europe was born when the walls were demolished, not when they were erected. Today the Pope said, knock down walls and build bridges. Those who love this city recognizes not only a quote of an important religious quote, but also something which was said typically by a former mayor, Giorgio Laprida, who said break down the walls and build bridges. But Europe has still been is been erecting walls, and the first wall has been the wall of fear. And I think it's important to deal with the question of which Tony Barber put just now to Joseph Muscat to understand how some of these ideas have now prevailed in the American election campaign. But I don't want to get into that. And it'll be also interesting to talk about economic growth. For me, the key point of growth is not economic. The drama of growth in Europe, about growth in Europe, is that there is no population growth. The major cultural challenge in Europe is motherhood, is the concept of family, which in our country is something which triggers a cultural clash and colored by ideology. This is understandable because of the different traditions in our country with regard to the different views on families and the varying ideas on how to recognize different forms of families, even though our constitution speaks very clearly on this issue. But the central issue of domestic community is something which goes beyond ideology and debates. We have a problem in that the forms of union between people are crumbling, and Italy is one of the countries which has less children in the world. Europe is the continent which is worse off from this point of view. Perhaps it's time to say that it is time to accept a cultural challenge with regard to maternity, to motherhood, and if you have a mechanism where there's no security for the future, you're not going to go anywhere. The Italian Jobs Act, important is not in the 2,000 odd extra jobs which have been created from the 22nd of February till today, Pardesis, or the 398 jobs which have become long-time jobs, or the reduction of the unemployment, all things which we're very happy about. But the key point about the Jobs Act is that household loans have been increasing, and that young couples have begun to be able to think of themselves as a household which can create the future and not just wait for the future. There's a big difference between making the future and waiting for the future. I think that this is an interesting issue which needs to be debated. We'll be talk about this over the next year, and Italy will be presenting a position paper on the issue of motherhood. We're doing it for ourselves, not just for Europe. One of these refrains for physicians is that physician, cure yourself. And there are a number of other issues which are important: digital economy, 4.0, manufacturing, investment in traditional forms of enterprise. I can't go into all of these, but something which Pope Francis said today is that there can be no Europe if there's no work for the younger generation. Terrorism has wounded the heart of our continent, but paradoxically, in the perception of the European values, something which is even more serious in everyday life is the lack of employment, the lack of job opportunities for young people than external threats to our security. Please don't misunderstand me. It's clear that terrorism is an absolute evil. Extremist terrorism is an absolute evil. But the image of Europe, the feeling of belonging to Europe, is damaged much more by the lack of positive economic opportunities and job possibilities than external threats, which sometimes actually reinforce the European identity. And I think that in some parts of our continent, those who lose elections are the people who can't create jobs. Demagoguery and populism has a much more fertile ground where there's a lack of jobs. So immigration and ongoing growth are still key words for us, but in 2016 we will be focusing particularly on culture because we believe not that it's a contribution to our city or this culture. There's a statue of Michelangelo which is looking at us. I think what's outstanding about We People from Florence is that we put a statue by Michelangelo together with other people's statues. If you think about it, it's the opposite of marketing. If you go to any other country and if there's a statue by Michelangelo, there'll be at least 5 waiting rooms telling you about the Michelangelo statue, 1 room where you hear about the life of Michelangelo, and then a 3D video which describes where he was born and where he grew up. And he was born in Florence and he was brought up elsewhere. I'm saying this because I was born in Florence, but I'm considered to be someone from the outskirts because I grew up outside Florence. In any other country in the world, you would prepare the vision of the statue of Michelangelo. Probably even people from Florence can't even recognize it among the 8 statues, actually 9. There's a statue of the Pope behind, one Pope behind us, which you can't see. I'm not sure everybody can recognize it because we're used to beauty. We're going to have a bilateral with the Prime Minister of Malta. He thinks we're going to have a bilateral sitting down. I'm going to take him to the Arnolfo Tower. As we walk in it, you may go in alive and come out dead from the Arnolfo Tower. It's a historical quote. Cosimo left it alive. He was jailed there. I'll show you the cell. Savonarola, for Savonarola, things didn't turn out so well. So he left, and then he was. But don't worry, Joseph, nothing will happen to you. But the fact is that beauty and culture is present everywhere, and we got used to it, and they have no effect on us. And instead, rediscovering what we are is key to Europe. When they tell you that because of the terrorist attacks we need to close our frontiers, we should be brave enough to say, if we close our borders, we keep them in. We're not defending us. We keep attending ourselves. We're keeping the killers inside because they've grown up in our homes, in our countries. And with Najab, a few days after the terrible Bataclan attack, we presented a tribute at the Sorbonne to all victims of the attacks. And in particular, I'd like to thank Najab for being with us to bring the voice of the French governor, particularly Valentina Sorresini, who is a university research worker from Venice who taught at the Sorbonne. Minister Giannini, Mr. Costa have established scholarships to commemorate her. The family was recently informed. But international terrorism struck at the heart of Europe by making use and starting from local killers, 2nd generation, 3rd generation. They were in contact, but these were people who were born in our cities, born in the hospitals where our children were born, went to the schools of our children, educated at the universities, or uneducated in the universities of our children, who were jailed in our jail system. So either we recover culture as an element of identity in order finally to remind ourselves who we are and what we need to defend ourselves from, or we're losing the challenge with our time and with ourselves. I am very fond of something which Chesterton wrote. Florentines have heard me say this many times. Chesterton said that the world will never end because of the lack of wonders, but because of the lack of wonder. Rediscovering wonder astonishment, beauty, culture as a constituent element of Europe. Europe, the home of humanism, the Pope said, the Europe as a land of opportunity. There may be debatable issues, but with an identity. There are no people without identities today. If I don't call you by name, who are you? What's the name of Europe today? And so, on these issues in the coming months, we will be calling on Europe to debate. We have obtained flexibility, not as much as we wanted, but a lot more than had been left to us by our predecessors. Also because it was zero. So as soon as you get some flexibility, that's already a result. We've managed to bring Europe to discuss migration, not in the way we would have liked. Too often the idea is that Europe is trying to patch things up without a long-term strategy. With the migration compact, we're suggesting a short-term solution, but at the same time, we're also providing a long-term vision. But what will characterize us most in coming months is the idea of culture, identity, education, human resources, and what makes people great, and what corresponds to the need for answers which people have. But what makes a community great? Because whether we like it or not, a community is never just an accumulation of men and women piled up one on the other, or a list of ID numbers. A community is not just a registrar, which is important, but it's not all there is. And that's why, by closing, I'd like to pay tribute to the European University Institute. I'd like to ask the Institute to help us in this coming year. From now till the next edition of the State of the Union, there will be a significant event on the 25th of March 2017. It's an important date. And I'm very proud and very grateful to be able to celebrate that day under the Maltese presidency. We will be working together because the 25th of March 2017 is the 60th anniversary of the signing of the treaties. It will, I hope, become a major event in which the European University Institute will have a major role, and also want the Institute to continue the battle which we began some time ago to create here in Florence. They say Fiesole. Well, it's basically, we're on the boundary. The great wager of the School of Government within a network with other major entities. And finally, I'd like to ask the Institute to give us a hand in a project which we think is very important, the Ventotene project. As you know, Ventotene is the home of the United States of Europe. It's a wonderful island, and the jail is now crumbling. It is a wound for for Italian identity, because this was where a person who would become one of the greatest presidents of the Italian Republic was jailed, Sandro Pertini. And there on Ventotene, Altiero Spinelli was jailed, as well as the person who was the first signature on the Italian Constitution, Umberto Terracini, the president of the Constituent Assembly. So there are very important pieces of Italian history too, but in particular, there's a European breadth there which goes beyond small selfishness. We've allocated funds to make Ventotene a place for young researchers, for European officials and for diplomats, for men and women of the Mediterranean who want to speak of politics and want to serve the public good in an unconditioned way. It would be a great Italian place, and I would like the European University Institute to manage it together with us, without asking any money of the Commission. We'll do this with our money. The fact is, this will become possible if the European University Institute not only wants to take on this challenge, but also to contribute to a major adventure together. And in concluding this, I have to ask to join me here in order to thank him and embrace him. I'd like to call on President Joseph Weiler to join me here, to whom the gratitude, my gratitude and gratitude of the Italian government goes. And I want to say the gratitude of this city. I think something I can say because I was its mayor. Thank you, Prime Minister. I have I'm a professor, and on the Obama scale, I'll give you top marks today. I'm a professor, so I find it natural to mark people. With regard to this common desire to establish a school, we believe we can declare our engagement today, and we hope that our marriage will soon follow. Now, as you know, the idea and the meaning of the State of the Union is to organize an encounter between academics and policymakers. But looking at the choice this year, which I consider to be one of my best decisions, I wouldn't like for the last picture to be me next to you. I'd like to call on Ruth Rubri Marin and her two children. We spoke of motherhood. And I would like her and her two children to be the last images. They're Fiorentina fans. Prime Minister Renzi, authorities, the French president of the president of the Institute. We conclude here, and we hope to see you again next year for the next edition of the State of the Union.